All right. Well, everybody, welcome. My name is Michelle from ALS United Connecticut, and we are happy to have our Ask the Expert webinar today about mental health. Um, we have Catherine Vlasto. She's a licensed clinical social worker. She has been working with our community and our organization for the last couple years, and we are so happy to have her support and expertise. So Catherine, I'll hand it over to you. And again, thank you so much for your time and your expertise.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to be with you all. And I have a lot of pollen in the back of my throat here. Allergy season is in full swing. So, um, what a privilege to be here with you all. My connection to ALS United is through the Grief Connection support group that meets once a month on Wednesday evenings. And it has been a true honor and privilege to be part of the ALS community. So, as Michelle said, I am a clinical social worker, private practice. I've had hospice background, end of life work through the Visiting Nurse Association in New Milford. I live in the northwest part of Connecticut in the little town of Goshen. And I I had been thinking about what to share today regarding mental health. And one of the things that I want to impress to all of us is that mental health is so important for the way we show up in the world. So I wanted to open up a little bit with just a definition of mental health. We do hear that, in the news. We hear it if you go to your doctor. Um, but what is the definition of mental health? So I would love to also, I know Michelle and Jess are monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, we'll make it more interactive. I only have 13 slides because I want this to be more of a, conversation. Because I do believe that we're not having enough conversations about mental health. They only do come up when something bad happens, and then when people decide that, hey, I kind of need to pay attention to my mental health. So I would love to hear, from your end to also what your own definition of mental health is, and also what it means to you in your own life. Um, so a definition of the mental health state, it's really a state of our emotional and psychological well-being in which an individual is able to use his or her cognitive, emotional capabilities and function in society and meet the ordinary demands of everyday life. So our mental health really helps to shape our relationship with others, and it helps us to respond to stress in our daily life. It can be incredibly useful in knowing how to react to change. ALS is a life-changing diagnosis, and it requires a person to react. So one's mental health matters at that point as much as medical treatment. Our mental health affects our patients with a challenging situation and our focus and our decision-making process. So an ALS diagnosis demands a response in all these aspects above, as a person needs to make decisions and focus on their treatment and be patient during the journey. So there's nothing like an illness to stop us in our tracks from whatever, we have been doing. If you're a person that makes plans and all of a sudden you get a cold and you can't feel like, you don't feel like going out or, getting to your plan. And you're not a patient person. You're someone who says, oh my gosh, my plan got thwarted and I really don't like that. Your mental health, your response to that change will be affected, right? So, So this is also true for family members and loved ones involved with someone with ALS. Everyone involved needs to respond. So, and because that response comes from the way we've been wired, the personality, our characteristics, the personality characteristics, those things affect the way that we respond to a life-changing situation. Um, Mental health is not mental illness. There's a big difference there, okay? So mental illness refers to a diagnosable disorder, so such as anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, so how do you know the difference, right? So mental illness, it disrupts a person's life and their daily functioning, as well as their thought patterns. So our mental health is affected by a mental illness. So very, very important to just make sure that, when you talk about your mental health, you're talking about the way that you feel, the way that you respond, and that can be different from having a psychiatric disorder. So what are the factors that affect our mental health? And one of the very big ones is our biology. So, and that is our brain's development. Any injuries we might have had, traumatic brain injuries, concussions, and also our brain's chemistry and the impact also of heredity and genes. And so if you look at your own family trees and you start to think about, how people have shown up in your family. Sometimes there's certainly a pattern, especially when it comes to mental illness and how people have been able to respond to that. And that can be a generational, trait, especially with depression. So what else affects our mental health? If you think about the everyday pressures that are stemming from challenges in our relationships, at work, and managing the responsibilities of everyday life. I talk to a lot of people who are multitasking all the time. They're responding to all kinds of situations that are happening in their lives. And that can mean caring for a loved one, having a full-time job, having children and their, responsibilities. That affects your mental health. And that is our response to how life is. So, environmental and situational factors can also have a negative impact on our mental health, and that is to be taken seriously. But one of the things I wanted to talk about is our mental health changes all the time. It's fluid, right? And one day, so that does not make you quote unquote crazy. One day you could feel tired because you didn't get enough sleep. So you're going to be cranky, or you are experiencing pain. Pain and mood are a correlation there, right? If you're in pain and your pain is not managed, more than likely you're not going to be a happy camper. So when we manage one situation, then our mood will improve. So whenever you have something difficult happening in your life, think about how you respond. And problem solving will improve your mental health, right? So when we start to think about what's in front of me today, what are the things that I need to do? What are the things I can put off? What's doable? What's not doable? That can help with like feeling completely overwhelmed and overstressed. And you'll be able to respond differently to the people that you're interacting with during the day. So mental health is fluid. Changes are happening depending on what is going on in our lives. And I've also seen that during stages of our life, our mental health is shaped by how we respond to each stage, right? So, college graduates, this is graduation season in June and May, and high school and college graduates, they have to figure out what the next step is. Everyone is asking them, what are you doing? Where are you going? What are you going to do with your life? there's a lot of pressure there. And I don't think enough people stop to like support college graduates and high school graduates and just saying it's going to be okay no matter what happens, right? So we have those stressors in every stage of life. And particularly if you think about even retirement, I think people have, I work a lot with older people. And even in retirement, you can have a reaction. We need to react. This is a new identity. Our mental health is impacted by our identity. Um, so important to be thinking about how in different places and stages in your life, your mental health can be changed, and that doesn't make you a stronger or a weaker person. It just means that a change has taken place and you need to respond to that situation. So be mindful of that as you're coping with diagnosis of ALS and family members as you're supporting your loved one with ALS. A huge change has taken place that affects your mental health. Um, so seeking and receiving support for mental health, how does that happen? So receiving support is not a sign of weakness, but it is a sign of acknowledgement of what is currently happening in your life and how you need to respond to the situation. So I find that seeking support is a courageous step and that ultimately can be so valuable in the way that you live your life. Um, so a life-changing diagnosis such as ALS, it demands a life-changing approach. So that means for me, all hands on deck, in terms of accessing all the tools that are available. So seeking out mental health support is, I consider, when people call me and they want to work with me, I just consider myself a tool in the toolbox that they're going to use for a time, and so there's no shame in doing that. It's just admitting to yourself that this is serious stuff and it's impacting the way I think about myself, about my situation, and I need someone to kind of come alongside and be there to listen. So even if you have never sought out mental health support before in your life, I would say give yourself permission to explore the options now because you will be glad you did. Um, I hope. um, and that is, something that um, a lot of the times people will say to me, I wish I had made that call earlier. Because they realize that taking an hour, for example, to talk to a mental health counselor is an hour that they're giving to themselves to kind of stop and think about how they're coping. What is going on in your mind about having a parent with, ALS or being the person living with a diagnosis? What does it all mean? So sometimes talking to a total stranger feels more supportive than talking to your family. And it's not because there's plenty of people that I talk to who have supportive family, but what I hear often is, um, I just don't want to keep talking about it with them. I don't want to burden them. So having someone independent who has your best, in mind can be very, very, very helpful. So when do we reach for support? In my book, as soon as possible, for ALS, managing the diagnosis while the focus is on medical treatment, taking care of yourself also needs to include how you're going to respond to this change that's taking place. So I always say, psychotherapy needs to be part of a treatment plan. Doesn't mean that you have to, do it, right? When we're given medications, we know that, it's important for us to take the medication, but knowing that your providers are viewing mental health support an important and integral part of your treatment plan, that you can access it when you need it. is so, so, so important. So, and that includes, the family members as well. How do you know you need help? So, the probably I want to say one of the number one answers to that is that people who know you and they're able to reflect that back to you. So we tend to be mirrors for our loved ones, and we're able to kind of monitor, like, and see and reflect back with how they're showing up. So when someone says who knows you very well, and that can be a family member, that can be a friend, that can be your doctor, if they know you very well and they're able to say, you don't seem like yourself. What is going on? Um, that is a sign that you can choose to be defensive about it, and you can say, everything is fine. I'm doing okay, handling it the best I can. But if that's a persistent, which is a decent answer, right? If that's your perception, but if the people in your life keep, coming to you and reflecting that back to you, you might want to stop and think about it. And being honest with yourself that if people around you are saying you seem a little down or you seem a little anxious, it's okay to pause for a minute and consider that for yourself. So other ways to kind of gauge for yourself, how do you know that you need help? When you have persistent sadness or low mood, again, not feeling yourself, like yourself. And certainly, with an ALS diagnosis, that is very, very valid, right? Um, when you are worried a lot, not a little bit, but a lot. I always look for patterns of behavior. I always look for ways that people are telling me, and I'm listening to find those patterns that people worry, let's say, about the future, right? And one tip on that, I always say, name it to tame it, right? And that means you can't just say, I'm anxious about the future, because that invites in all kinds of thoughts. So, but if you're able to say, I'm worried about being able to do more for myself. Okay. That's a little bit more specific, and you can, get in there and you can unpack that in your mind, even if you're not talking to a counselor, right? How do you know you need help? There's changes in appetite and sleep patterns. You're sleeping too much, too little, and that you lose interest in activities that you used to enjoy. Sometimes having difficulty concentrating or making decisions. And again, we're looking for patterns, not just this happened last Wednesday and you didn't feel like yourself, right? We all have those days where we don't feel like things are going well, but we're looking for over a period of time. Um, when you're feeling consistently overwhelmed by your daily tasks and things that need to be done. And also when you find yourself withdrawing from people and even your own family. So those are signs, if you will, of being able to say to yourself, maybe I should talk to somebody. Um, okay, so where do we begin? How do we find mental health support? Um, I would probably start with your health insurance plan, and you can call your health insurance and see what the coverage for behavioral health is, and what your information that you'll get from them is for in-network providers and out-of-network providers. So all your insurance plans have um, a directory with providers. So, for example, for myself, I accept a lot of insurances, several. So I am on their panel, just like any other doctor or any other provider. I'm on their panel. So you can call up and say, oh, I live in Danbury and I need to find a provider in my area. So the person on the phone hopefully will go through the directory, do a quick search, and find someone. If you want to see someone in person, um, they will find you, hopefully, a provider that's within your network. And now with the beauty of, telehealth, you can have access to a telehealth health provider who is not like around the corner from your house. So that is a first good source of information for yourself. Um, I would also ask your primary care physician for a referral to a psychologist, a psychiatrist, social worker, or a licensed mental health professional. Um, and I do want to encourage you to seek out someone who's licensed in their discipline. Those of us that are, we tend to be, we have a code of ethics that, we live and work by. And there is recourse, if something were to go awry. So finding the right person is so important. But also word of mouth. You can find a therapist, through word of mouth. I mean, I always tell people if you ask for a recommendation for a plumber or a contractor, what's keeping you from asking, do you know of a good therapist? It's okay to have that conversation. You'll be surprised, if your friend or your family member says, well, I've heard of, even if they don't want to tell you they're going to therapy, or let me find one for you. And then they, give you a number. Um, and there's a website called psychologytoday.com. I call it the dating site for clinicians with potential clients. And this is where you can go look for a provider that you'll be able to see. So I am on that panel, so you could on that website. So you will see somebody's picture and you will read a little bit about them, their education, their specialties, whether they take insurance or not. If they take insurance, what kind of insurance? If they don't take insurance and they're private pay, how much they charge per session. And even if you choose to see a provider that's not within your network in your insurance, most providers are able to provide what's called a super bill, and you will be able to submit that to your insurance, and you pay the provider during the session, and then you'll get the bill from them, and then you submit it to your insurance. So consultation with a mental health provider. I wanted to put that in there just to sort of give you hopefully some helpful ideas. Um, it's important to have, if you do decide to seek out mental health support, it's important to find someone that you feel comfortable. It's not always easy to open up to a total stranger for a lot of people. So chemistry needs to be part of the relationship. So it is a relationship. And if there's no chemistry, and if you don't feel comfortable with that person, it's okay to go down the list and find someone that you click with. You should be able to look forward to going and talking to your therapist. And so I would inquire about their experience and their training. And I would, because we're talking about ALS here, I would absolutely ask them if they've had experience working with people who have lived with a serious medical diagnosis. I think, there are wonderful therapists out there, but I think the people that have worked and they have the background will be even, more in your corner because they have a context of what you're dealing with right now. So I would absolutely ask that question for them. So another thing to ask about is what's their treatment approach? So there are a lot of different approaches to treating mental health and supporting mental health. So, but one of the most common ones is the cognitive behavioral therapy model, where we really examine our thought patterns. We really use strategies such as, which I think can be so very helpful in someone who's living with ALS and someone who's supporting someone living with ALS, is the strategy of reframing. How do we reframe our thoughts, but how do we reframe the situation that we're responding to? So sometimes reframing can be very, very useful in being able to shift um, the way that we think about things. And that can make a big difference in improving our mental health. So another thing to do during initial, once you find a therapist, would be to set goals. What do you want to get out of the sessions? Why did you call in the first place, right? So that can include, frequency of sessions. How often do you want to meet with someone? And again, if you let people know, your therapist know where you're coming from, what you're dealing with, whether you're a caregiver or a person living with ALS, there needs to be flexibility, in scheduling, because you might have some days where you feel up for, going to the session, and some days where you're just either too tired or there's too much going on. So I do believe that, stating that can be very, very helpful in, managing expectations. So, and for the goals of treatment, as a clinician myself, I always include finding good coping skills in learning about emotional regulation and exploring our relationship patterns. So those are things that you can learn to unpack, in therapy. So how else can we support our mental health? Because psychotherapy is not for everyone. So I didn't come on here to, tell you go pick up the phone and find, a therapist. Even though that is can be such a useful, endeavor. But supporting your mental health comes in different shapes and sizes, just like we do. And it's about focusing your inner dialogue, right? Think about what you're thinking about and becoming aware of your own thoughts. And how do we do that? I think, we live in a society where everything is just very fast paced, and we're on the phone and we're scrolling and we're going to the next thing. Sometimes slowing things down and thinking about situations that we're in can be so, so helpful. And I have found, and there's studies out there now that I'm giving you a very free and very quick tip: journaling. Journaling is one of the easiest ways to shift our mood. And it's been studied, actually, people were given journaling, talking to a therapist, and running, I think it was. And they said that they found that journaling had the quickest effect in changing somebody's mood. So I was like, wow, it's free, it's easy to get to, you can do it whenever you feel like it. And you can journal on your phone if you can't write, you can dictate it. But there's something about being able to slow down and slow your mind down and being able to express, your thoughts. And for journaling, I always recommend that, you do it in the way that works for you. We don't all need to be beautiful writers, but sometimes it's just words with no complete sentences. But you'll be amazed at how quickly you can shift, your perspective. So, so other ways to support your mental health can include the creative arts and, engaging in something that, you feel close to, as well as, being physical, go for a walk or being outside in nature. So I would say it's okay to hear yourself think. It's okay to do that. So taking time for yourself is so, so important. guilt needs to be placed on hold for a few minutes that you can take to gather your thoughts and take some deep breaths. Um, we need to do that for ourselves. I always tell people, no one's coming for us. We have to figure this out for ourselves. So it's nice to have support, around us. But at the end of the day, it's what we do within ourselves. How do we talk ourselves off a cliff, right? If we're up there, not a good place and comfortable place to be for sure. Um, Other ways to support your mental health can mean you just have a meaningful conversation with family and friends. So when we feel better, we definitely fare better. So it's okay to have challenging conversations, difficult conversations, because that is unburdening yourself with someone else. You're sharing what is going on with you. And I think feeling alone in anyone's situation is one of the worst things that, we can do. That's when our mental health really suffers. Um, so seeking out support, so important. Using all the support groups ALS United has to offer, and being around people with similar situations, definitely a great source of support. But also, why, if you think about why that's helpful, is you're not alone, but it's also able to shift your perspective if you hear someone else who's handling a similar situation. So, and it's going through the same journey. So, um, any meaningful activities, it's bringing meaning into our lives that is connected to our mental health. Finding purpose and feeding your soul. It's all about, sometimes we can get wrapped up into like the physical needs and making sure we have what we need, but really spending some time to just be quiet and reflecting about what you're thinking about can be so helpful. Um, and sleep. Sleep is so, so important if you think about it. If we don't get enough sleep, we're going to be exhausted in the morning. And again, we're probably going to be cranky. We're not going to show up as our best selves. So to the extent that you can work on that you're able to, I think, worthy endeavor. So, okay, I'm looking at the time. Sorry, it's kind of my last slide. All right, I just wanted to leave you with, I found this quote that I thought it was very interesting, and it's musical. So I'm not musical. I appreciate music, but I loved what this definition of mental health was shared with me. So it says, mental health is the underlying score that shapes each person's life experience. This soundtrack can carry both uplifting melodies and challenging notes, yet it remains integral to daily functioning. Thankfully, people can nurture their own mental health by adjusting the tempo, restoring balance, and approaching life with greater awareness and purpose. So, adjusting the tempo. I hope you remember that phrase. Very helpful. Thank you. All right.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I will stop recording and then we can open it up to Q&A.